Hello, you're listening to Two Old Chuffs, a tale of two hospices. I'm Tamsin Thomas.
And I'm Gina Stone.
And we're talking today about a subject that at first I wondered if I should describe it as sad. And then I thought, no, it's a really important subject and maybe one of those that gets pushed to a side but ought to be at the forefront of some conversations. And it is bereavement.
I'd like to introduce you to Marie and to Ange, who are counsellors at the hospice, and they support our patients and their families at what is really quite an important time. So, Ange, I wonder if you can kind of start by just letting us know a little bit about your role here at the hospice. How long have you been here?
So I've been at the hospice for 14 years. I've been doing the counselling role full-time since last October, which I love. And so what I do is I go around and I speak to the patients and any relatives or friends that might just want to chat really about how they're feeling about things, if they're worried about things, if there's something that we can help them with. Children come into it as well, so it's about talking to parents about how they can speak to the children, things that might help. So it's generally that sort of thing really that I do.
Fantastic. Sorry, I was going to say, Maria, can you just tell us a little bit about your background too?
I've worked at the hospice, this will be my 21st year.
Gosh.
I've worked as a staff nurse on the ward for about 19 of those years. So I've been working in the counselling role, my present role, for the last 2 and a bit years. Yes, and very much like Ange said, I see my role more as supporting the family rather than counselling them, just giving them the time and space to look at what is important to them, coming from their perspective rather than our own preconceived ideas about what may be worrying them or issues that they may need to address, because quite often they're completely different to what we may expect.
And you both come from a role and backgrounds that involve looking after people in a caring way, and do you think that helps your role at the moment? Does that give you a different insight, you think?
Most definitely, yes. Very much so. I think having an understanding of the illness itself and different ways that can affect a person, having an insight and knowledge of some of the medications and problems that can be associated with that. Yeah, I think it is of benefit. I don't know about you, Ange.
Yeah, I think it is. Having worked on the ward as a healthcare assistant, you do get more of an insight into things and how people are. And then my own sort of bereavements that I've been through also help.
But does it also help? Because the thing that interests me is, how do you start those conversations? Does it help that you've got that background on the ward and that you maybe have been bereaved yourself?
I think it helps, yeah, I do. Although people grieve differently, so you can't say I know how you feel, for example, because even if it's the same, even if we both lost our mother, for example, you grieve in different ways. But you've got an idea, I can empathise because I've been there as well. And sometimes I think that helps people. Sometimes people will say, have you lost your mum? And I'll say, well, yes, I have. So I think it gives me insight sometimes. And with children as well, because, telling children that they're going to lose a parent is something that I've done as well. So I could take from that how I felt and the things that helped with that. So,
that's a tough conversation, isn't it?
It is a tough conversation, yeah.
And, one that I think the general public wouldn't assume happens here because we're an adult hospice, but it's about reminding them to think the other way, that the patient might be the mum or dad of a child, quite a small child sometimes.
Are there other services in Cornwall that would help with that children's support?
Penhaligon's friends do. They're sort of post-bereavement. They do post-bereavement, and they help children a lot. So they're a good organisation to get hold of, really, if you're in that position.
So when you first go in the room or you first meet the person, where on earth do you start a conversation which you hope might lead to them opening up or chatting?
Well, first and foremost, I would ensure that I'm welcomed into that room, because you might not necessarily be. So it's gaining permission before we start, and just making yourself comfortable and allowing them to be comfortable with you. So it's really a brief introduction to begin with, and I find quite often I'll do that in advance and allow them time to think about it. I'll explain my role and step away unless they choose to continue the conversation, because it is very much their choice. I'm a visitor in their room, and sometimes you have to remind yourself that not to have anyone else's agenda on your mind before you go into the room, but to go in with an open mind. And if they choose not to speak about something on a given day, and people do say that, that they might not want to look at what is staring them in the face. And that is their choice. But quite often we work with that. And if they know that you're willing to recognise that, they will quite often choose at some point in time to come back to you. So I always ensure that they've got my details if and when they're ready.
Can that be a long time sometimes, or a short time?
Yes. A lot of our patients come to us over many months, many years. And the support is not just for the patient, it's there for the relatives and the friends. And if they may not be ready when they first come to us, once they've gained trust and confidence, it may be something that they look at in time. So there is no time limit on that support.
And sometimes, is it something else that gets you talking first?
Can be, yeah, it can be. Sometimes it's things like my earrings, for example, have started conversations off before. I used to wear it when I was a healthcare and the uniform was green. I used to wear the green earrings that perfectly matched. And the amount of people that commented on my earrings, and then they'd go into that a little bit, and then they start to veer off a bit and start to talk about other things. So yeah, it's surprising really when you walk into a room and somebody can just jump on something like that, and then the conversation starts.
And are you given the time so that if what might have been a 10-minute pop into this room becomes an hour or 2 hours or whatever?
I think that's the joy for me of coming away from the healthcare side, where I could be talking to somebody, but then a bell's ringing and I'm aware that the bell's ringing and it's perhaps going on a bit, and I think, I know I've got to go somewhere else. Whereas now I can sit and talk for however long they want to talk for, which is brilliant. It really is. Yeah.
I'm just listening to the seagulls who seem to be joining this podcast, but that would be going on normally when you're having your conversations as well.
Yes.
And we've talked on these podcasts before about the comfort people find in just hearing life going on around them. And does that sometimes aid your conversations, that people relax because they can hear a routine going on, that real life is around them still?
Yeah, I think so. And they like the things that patients quite often say are that they like to hear laughter, that they might be ill but people can laugh around them, and sometimes family and friends are afraid to laugh They're afraid to crack a joke. Patients have said that to me a lot, that I feel that I can be normal now. And of course, if family friends are around and they join in with the laughter or whatever, and it makes them feel more comfortable, I guess. People relax.
And a lot of our patients have still got a lot of living to do. They've not necessarily come in for end of life care. And what you asked earlier about things that start conversation, I find sometimes by introducing myself as patient and family support, they might not want to talk about themselves, but when they know that their families can get support, that is quite often what they pick up on. And that opens conversations.
I always think it's quite a difficult role, is that patient and family support, because quite often, as a nurse of a long time, you maybe had a patient who didn't want anybody to talk to the family, and the family who didn't want you as clinicians to talk to the patient. And before you know, actually you've got quite a jigsaw of people that you can and can't talk to. And I have always found that actually that role of patient and family support or counsellor, to be able to bring that grouping together, it just leads for people to feel far more relaxed, and actually be able to plan together the time that they've got left, which is so important.
It is.
Rather than being worried what each other are thinking, which is often the very same thing.
It is. And the other thing, Tamsin, that you were saying, or you, Ange, about the time that we're given, part of our work is looking at advanced care planning, something that they may not have felt able to address before they come to us. It really very much depends on how long a patient has been diagnosed. Sometimes it's very recent. Other times they may have had several years leading up to needing to come into the hospice. But that is something that we can help with if that is something that they want to look at. And that can help put the family's mind at rest. Once they've dealt and written down what they would like, then they can put it aside, and it's dealt with. It's there. Everyone knows where they stand. They can carry on with living then, and it's not like the elephant in the corner of the room that no one's wanting to talk about.
And interestingly, there's another elephant, I think, in the room, and I don't mind saying it cropped up in our family when my dad was dying, and we all agreed we didn't know what bereavement was supposed to look like, and should we be crying? Because I was quite relieved at the end, because it wasn't nice, but then there's the guilt that comes if you can't immediately cry. Do you play a role in helping people when that question comes into the room?
I think so. I think quite often people start to grieve before the event, and that actually includes the patient as well. Quite often the things that come up the most are the anger and the guilt. Why them? Why not me? If it's a mum that's losing her son. So I think, bereavement itself is such a big thing, and I've got a leaflet that I give out to people. It's just something that I found somewhere, and I give it out, and people quite often, they'll start to read, if they come in for post-bereavement especially, they'll start to sort of look at it a little bit when I hand it to them. It's got all these things on it about what it can be like. Your head is fuzzy, you can't think straight, you've lost your phone and you find it in the fridge. All these sorts of things, they can't cope around people who have still got their mum, dad, whoever it is they've lost. But anger and guilt is the main thing, I think, that comes out, and people nearly always find something to feel guilty about. And it can be really, we would think quite trivial, but to them it's quite a big thing. I don't know what you think, Marie.
I think that's it. We offer the space that those things, what I try and do is to see the patient and family members separately and together, because quite often they will try and protect each other So those conversations don't automatically happen when they're together. But if you allow them time away, and Ange and I have both got private offices where they're given the time to express what they feel, and it also gives them a time to ask those questions, that it is perfectly normal to feel guilty, to feel angry, to feel a sense of relief sometimes that someone else is taking that pressure off their shoulders for even a short period of time. I think that really helps.
I think that's really key, because I can remember when my mum died, this huge sense of relief, because she had been in and out of the hospice and she'd been so very poorly. And I remember the next morning saying to the nurse that happened to meet me at the door, I feel really bad because today is a joyful day, but I'm only saying that to you because if you are horrified, then I'm not going to say it to anyone else. And it was the best thing I could have said out loud, because she said, no, that's perfectly acceptable. Of course it's a joyful day. You know, your mum was very religious. She's gone where she wants to go. And yes, the worries come off your shoulders. But it does take someone, dare I say it, like you both, to give permission. Is that fair, to have feelings?
I always say to people that it's okay to feel like that, and that it comes from a place of love and not hate. So you just want the best, and at that point that is the best. But yeah, a lot of people feel guilty about those feelings, but it's so normal to feel that way. It really is.
And does that put pressure on you, or do you feel it's a privilege to be in that position?
It is. It is very much a privilege to be in the position and to have the time that we were able to offer. I think as well as working part of a close team, when that's raised by a family member or by a patient, that they may feel that they are ruining the lives of those around them by the illness that they have through no fault of their own. But we can utilise the other members of the team if we see that a family is straining under the caring role. You know, we have physios, a wonderful physio department, occupational therapists, consultants, catering staff. You know, we can call on them all to help support their role if their aim is to go home again and to care for the patient at home. We do what we can to support that. And I think that is really useful and helpful to them, that we can ensure that that's put in place to help relieve that strain.
I think you've said before, haven't you, Gina, that anyone in a hospice might be the person who lands up being the listening ear.
I think you find that, but I think it's also having the team here, that the ladies are willing to be able to then take it to that next step. Because I think actually it's often the people that aren't in the nursing uniform or the clinical uniform that actually have that first conversation, because actually it's a really easy conversation to have if somebody is maybe got the back to you, the hoover or the mop or whatever, and then actually our housekeeping team, they take a lot of that, and actually the next visit then is usually just to, because you're part of a team, it's about seeing how that conversation then moves with the rest of the team. So yeah, I think it's hugely important that I think all staff working in this kind of environment needs that awareness that actually it could be anybody. I know that your team, 2 times, and actually, often there have been conversations in the concourse or, when you're at a fundraiser. It's just as soon as you wear that badge that says you're from the hospice, people want to talk.
A friend of mine, her dad passed away with us, and her elderly mum was convinced that one of our housekeeping staff ran the whole show, literally, and would say, I'm only speaking to so-and-so. And the poor old ward sister would have to back off so that conversation could be had, but it made her mum happy. So and everything was adjusted to allow for that, which I thought said a lot about our charity and why it's very special. You're listening to Two Old Chuffs, a tale of two hospices. I thought it might be a moment to introduce someone to our conversation about bereavement, if that's all right with you. And I think, Marie, actually, it's someone that you know. I had the pleasure recently of meeting a lovely man called Keith from Carbis Bay, and he's had to cope with bereavement during this lockdown, well, the first lockdown, which sounds horrific to me. His wife Sue died at St Julia's last November. And he's written this wonderful book of poetry called Reflections. And it goes back to just after he met Sue, she gave him a poetry book and she marked this one poem that was called To Be With You, because it was about two souls who meet and are meant for each other. And then he took me on to the 7th anniversary of their meeting when he wrote her a poem called To Stand With You. Okay, now we have to come forward to where we are now. And Keith, after he'd been bereaved, joined a poetry group. And at this point, I'm just going to hand over to Keith. I recorded him on a very noisy roadside outside our shop in Hale, but he just explains what happened.
So I got to thinking about, in January and February, how could I occupy my mind more? Because bereavement is difficult, no matter how you plan your day and your week. And I'd seen advertised in the local St Ives paper about a poetry circle. And I thought, shall I go along and give that a go? And that was the only poetry I'd ever written. But I thought I'd go along, and amazingly, what they'd set for the week that I was going was you had to bring along a poem that somebody had given you and a poem that you had written. I'd only had those two things to offer, but that was enough for the week that I went. And I shared those with the group. And for the next task, for the next meeting, which was every 2 weeks, they'd said, let's bring a photograph or a painting along, and a poem that you've been inspired to write from the painting. So Sue and I had a painting by Britt Harkis, a renowned illustrator and artist on the Orkneys, who we'd had contact with since we'd been there in 2015, and we had some commission work done by her. But we had one of her paintings, and it's called The Road Home. And Sue had always wanted to walk the road again. So we went in 2015, and Sue would like to have gone back last year, but she was just too ill. And she was even determined, she was even talking in October about going there, just trying to go there before the end of October, and it was just obviously not possible, but that was her dream. And she wanted to walk the road in the illustration, in the picture. So I based a poem on that road, and it's called Going Home, and that's in the poetry book as well. So, and then came the idea from that, because I'd written 2 poems basically by then. I then had the idea that perhaps I can put a few things together and actually do a poetry book as a tribute to Sue and use it for charity means as well. But what was incredible was the words of, because I'm not a poet, people have read the words in the book and have said they are really something. You're a gifted person. But I found it quite difficult to put things together. But words of inspiration came, and I look back at the poems now, and they are remarkable. Some of them, and yes, it helped me through a difficult time.
Amazing.
Isn't that extraordinary? And he just very calmly says bereavement is difficult. But I can't imagine how it must be. How is it for the people you're talking to now who've had to deal with bereavement? It's such a dreadful year when we've been locked down so much.
It's huge. I think the word that gets mentioned the most to me, because I still do the counselling over the phone, is lonely. They're lonely. They've had things, people said to me, they a bit like that gentleman, had decided to go out and join a club and, learn new things just to get them out, and of course everything's shut. And I think that's the biggest problem for people, as it is for anyone else really, but if you've been bereaved on top of that, it's very difficult. They obviously can't see family and friends quite often, so it's a big thing to be bereaved during this time really.
It's the isolation that people feel. It just makes it very, very hard. I know the community services have been very supportive with the listening ear, where people can call and speak to members of the team, and that's proved very helpful.
I thought it was interesting that Keith, he'd obviously acknowledged that he was coping with bereavement and then had come up with something to do. Is that what a lot of people do?
It is. I know I've worked with a lot of families and seen them at later stages where they've done fundraising, and a lot of that has been for the hospice charity. And I think that has brought the family together. It's given them meaning. It's helped them deal with the situation that they found themselves in, but also kept the person's name alive. They're able to talk about it, and quite often it's the whole generations of family that are working together on that.
I think there's some quite interesting ways of remembering now on social media, and places like that actually we perhaps wouldn't have thought about years ago, but actually people have. You're right. The fundraising hook, but also there are tributes online, or because actually we can't have funerals in the same way at the moment. People are looking at kind of streaming funerals for people who are far and wide to be able to see. So I think it's absolutely about trying to get people as inclusive as possible in the ways that we have, which would have been totally alien to us, even last year, I think. But people are really having to absolutely think and acknowledge that this is this one opportunity, and whilst I think actually next year or whenever we get to whatever the new normal is, there are going to be so many celebrations of life around for people who have where we can get more people together, but actually at the minute I think it's just really trying to find those ways in. And I think writing's lovely, and I'm sure both of you ladies, you'll hear of people who have perhaps turned to art or to different creative means to actually remember and manage. Sometimes I think the arts are really helpful, aren't they? And it's difficult to talk.
Very much so.
I think that's a really important thing you've said there. I've written it here. Why is it hard to talk? Happy to be a perfect example of this, because I work in communications. I'll talk to the end of the road and back, as you all three, and even our producer knows. Can I talk about my last year during which I've had a bereavement? No. Can't find a way of bringing it up at all. And then I've gone through the cycle, which I guess you're both going to go, yeah, I've heard this all before, where I think, am I going to cry? What's going to make me cry? At what point am I going to break down? Am I going to break down? Perhaps I'm not. Perhaps I'm hard. Perhaps I'm a hard-faced person, and isn't that dreadful? And what does that say about my relationship with Dad, who I absolutely adored? And there's a whole wealth of stuff going on, and I keep thinking to myself, will it hit me during a podcast, maybe? Or, and I'm surrounded by people like you guys. One particular person down at St Julia's who just keeps dropping me a note. You okay? How's it going? Because I think she knows at some stage. But why is it hard sometimes to say something?
I think that we try to deal with it in that way, I guess. We try to avoid it for a while because perhaps it's too painful to think about right now. We've got other things to do. We need to do this, we need to do that. We take our mind off it. A lot of that happens a lot. And I think people do get quite hung up sometimes on the fact that they can't cry. I remember my mum saying that actually when my dad died. What are people going to think of me at the funeral because I didn't cry? Well, you probably will cry at some stage, just not now. And that's fine. It's the way that you deal with it. I have said to people before, if you really feel that this is a real problem, that you can't cry, get the saddest, I was going to say record, I'm aging myself.
That's all right, you're allowed. That's fine.
The saddest song and play it. And quite often that works. And that'll just open the floodgates and then that's it. And then whenever they hear that song, or anything sad, they're crying all the time then. And then they want to know why they're crying all the time. And it's because that's where the love goes. It's got nowhere to go, so it comes over your eyes, down your cheeks.
Oh, I love that. That's a really lovely line. Does that mean that bereavement doesn't have a time period?
Well, I think when you've lost something that's irreplaceable, and that's usually what we're talking about, regardless of what the relationship was, it's someone you've lost that's irreplaceable. I think grief and grieving is a very important time that shouldn't be rushed. There is no time limit on that. People deal with it in very different ways. I think it's an English thing, really, that this not being able to cry, or the fear of crying, the fear of breaking down. And I think that's the important thing about having a space where you can look at those feelings and actually have permission to cry, that it is okay to do that. To look at that relationship and pull it apart, regardless of what it is, how it is for you. And that does take time. We're able to offer that space and the time, and we're willing to sit. It's non-judgmental, and just to try and help people deal with that. There's no right or wrong way.
So our discussion today, if it's been listened to, might be being listened to by people who've been bereaved who've got nothing to do with the hospice. Or it might be people who have had people here. If they wanted to explore this further, where do you signpost people to go to find out more?
Well, there's Cruise. They could bring Cruise. There is a thing called WAY, which stands for Widowed and Young. That's quite a good one. That one's online, but you do have to pay. I think it's £25 a year for that one. But because quite often people feel that they're the only ones that feel this way and there's nobody else around like it. But that's, they can all interact together on that one. I think it sounds quite good. I've not actually, gone into it as such, but there are lots of organisations really. If you just sort of look online, they will pop up.
I think there are, because I looked a little while ago, and I think whilst there are lots of organisations that support in different ways, I think it's having somebody to help somebody look, because actually you don't quite know what you want always. It's not very clear, and I think it is just a case of going and trying sometimes.
Yeah.
And perhaps that support of a friend or somebody in your bubble to actually go with you, because it's quite difficult going to things on your own when you've been bereaved and always part of a couple, for example. Or it's about actually having somebody that can kind of go through that door to support you, which I think is hugely important. And I think, like we've talked about, it's just at the minute it just feels even more heightened, I think, because of the coronavirus.
Well, thank you so much It's a delicate, sometimes tricky subject, but it's been fascinating listening to the two of you. And if you are interested in Keith's book, it's called Reflections. We've got it on sale when our shops are open at Hale, Falmouth, Truro, Perranporth, Loo and Liscard. It's priced at £3.99 and it is, I can recommend it, it is absolutely lovely little book. Ange, Marie, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Gina, lovely to see you.
As always, you.
And you've been listening to Two Old Chuffs, A Tale of Two Hospices.